All right. Again, welcome to the Medical School Showcase. My name is Teresa Blackman, like I just said. I'm the pre-health advisor here at UTC. Here's my contact information, email and office number and location. If you guys have any questions afterwards, you want to set up a pre-health advising appointment, definitely feel free to do so. If you're a currently enrolled student, you guys can actually schedule through Navigate, but if you're not currently enrolled, then you'll definitely need to shoot me an email. I'm happy to chat with prospective students, alum, returning folks, the whole gambit. If you're affiliated with UTC, I'm happy to chat with you. So the reason of this showcase and kind of the things that we're going to go over, the first thing is what makes a good medical school application, because that is always the most asked question. What do I need to put? How do I need to structure my application? So we're going to review that. We're also going to review how to look at schools for best fit. Not every school fits every person. And then we're going to review medical schools in the region, so that's Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. And I'm also going to give you some resources to look at schools outside the region if you're not a local resident or you just want to change the scenery. So first we're going to talk about terms, because if you have spent any time looking at any kind of medical school or any kind of healthcare related field, there's a lot of acronyms and you kind of get lost in the ABCs. So the first one we're going to talk about is an MD. This is an abbreviation for Medina Doctor. I probably said that wrong, but you know, I don't speak Latin. But this is a doctor of medicine. Most of the doctors that you visit are going to have an MD. This is the most common medical doctor degree. It's pretty standard. Most programs offer an MD. The AAMC is the Association of American Medical Colleges, and they oversee all of the MD programs in the US and MD related programs that you can practice medicine in the United States. And so the AAMC will become something you're very familiar with as you are moving through the med school process. A DO is a doctor of osteopathic medicine, and we will go into a lot more detail about the differences between an MD and a DO later, but a DO is still a full-fledged doctor. You can still practice medicine, you are still certified, you're able to specialize. It's just a different way of looking at and understanding medicine. There is a different association, the ACOM, the American Association of Colleges of Osteopathic Medicine, and there is a different application process, which we'll touch on later. But as far as this is not, you know, lower than a doctor, this is not lesser than a doctor, you're still a doctor, you're just looking at medical knowledge and practice a little bit different. The MCAT is something everybody will soon know and sort of cringe at. The MCAT is the medical college admissions test, and both MD and DO applicants have to take this test. It is the standardized test for all medical programs you will be able to apply to, and it's a beast. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, so we want to prepare and prepare often. The CASPER is a computer-based assessment for sampling personal characteristics. It's an online situational judgment test, and a lot of medical schools are turning to this more and more now, given COVID has sort of removed the ability to have face-to-face interviews. Not as many medical schools have required the CASPER, but we're seeing a little bit of an uptick, so I definitely wanted you to be familiar with it since it will be something you're going to see a lot. The AAMC VITA. This is new. Again, in response to COVID, there has been sort of changes in the way interviews are conducted. And so if you are getting ready to apply, or you are maybe applying next year, you may run into this. And it is a one-way video recording interview. And you will be given questions, you'll have to respond and record those responses. And it's a way for medical schools to sort of assess your competencies. So it is something that you will become very familiar with. The AMCAS is the American Medical College Application Service. If you are applying to an MD program, you will be filling out the AMCAS, and you will be submitting all of your documents, all of your things to that service. And then you indicate what schools you want to be able to view your AMCAS, and they send the schools that information. So you do not apply to each individual school. The AA COMAS is the DO version of the MCAS. And so, like I referenced earlier, you will fill out this application for DO programs. A secondary application, it's an additional application. And so this is something that gets people a little bit confused from time to time. And so essentially what the secondary is a school will receive your initial application. They will review your information, and if they decide they'd like to move forward with you as an applicant, they will send you a secondary. And this is where you will answer those school-specific questions. So you want to be really intentional about the documents that you submit to either the AMCAS or the AA COMAS. It's all about why you want to be a doctor, not why you want to go to a specific program. The secondary application is where you highlight why you're interested in that specific program. For most medical schools, the secondary is the next step. So if you are viewed as an eligible applicant on your initial application and schools want to move forward with you, they'll send you a secondary. Some schools automatically send a secondary to everyone. So reference the program specifically to see how they operate with their secondary applications. But again, secondaries are always a good thing. So now we're going to review what you need to apply to medical school. And while the slide seems really small, it's a whole lot. So you want to have a competitive GPA, because a competitive GPA is really going to be one of the things that gets your foot in the door. So for example, in the state of Tennessee, an overall GPA that's competitive is a 3.6. And so that overall GPA is referencing all of your classes. So your English composition, your history, your math, your science, absolutely everything. Your science GPA is traditionally biology, chemistry, math, and physics. And the competitive GPA for the science in the state of Tennessee is 3.72. And now these GPAs are not program-based. These are based on applicants. So of all the people that have applied to medical school in the state of Tennessee, the average competitive GPA for those folks is listed here. So it's not necessarily for a specific program, if that makes sense. For the MCAT, a competitive score ranges between a 501 and a 522, which is a really broad range. But an ideal range that's going to give you a good solid score is 507 to 515. The majority of schools that we're going to highlight today, they fall within that range. There are a few that are a little bit higher, but for the most part, if you can hit between a 507 to a 515, you're doing pretty good. That's a good score. Required classes. This is where it gets very interesting. Some medical schools are now moving to a sort of, we don't have any specific requirements. A lot of medical schools don't reference biochemistry as required, but you need to take all of these classes listed. Not because they're required for medical school, but because this is the content that's on the MCAT. And I don't know about you, but I don't think many of us can teach ourselves biochemistry to where we can answer a 90-minute intense exam on biochemistry. So regardless of the med schools you are applying to, regardless of the requirements, this is the content that will be on the MCAT. So these are must-take classes. Kind of no way around it. You need to have this content, and you need to know this content well. There's additional content outside of these classes that you'll need to review for the MCAT, but this is going to present all of the concepts that you need. Now, these are some recommended courses, and like I said, most medical schools don't require them, but they can be helpful. They can be helpful for MCAT content because they're going to expound on some of the concepts that were presented in the courses listed in the previous slide. It's also going to help you with a lot of reference material when you start your first couple years of medical school. So these are not bad ideas. to take. They're definitely really good ideas. They're not imperative. If you don't take these classes, it is not to mean you won't do well in medical school or you won't do well on the MCAT. These are just suggestions that students that have done well have taken and said that, you know, concepts or content in these classes was really helpful. So what you don't need to apply to medical school, you don't need to have a specific major. Contrary to popular belief, you don't need to be a science major. This is something that is probably the thing I get asked the most is, what major is going to make me most competitive? What major do I need to be to go to med school? And a lot of people think it's science because a lot of doctors that they've spoken to have said, oh, well, I majored in science. And that was definitely the trend 10 years ago. But as we see the medical community evolving, as we see medical admissions evolving, the social science and the humanities are really making a strong showing. And if you're able to present your application well, you can really have a leg up against science majors coming from a non-science field, because these medical schools like people that can think on their feet. They like people that can think outside the box. They like critical thinking skills. And a lot of times, the social sciences and the humanities majors, they'll approach a situation much differently than a science major will, and that can sometimes be an advantage. It can also sometimes be a disadvantage. The important thing is that you need to major in something that you're the most competitive in, because as we referenced a few slides before, you need to have a competitive GPA. If you do poorly in biology, but you're very adamant that that needs to be your major because you were told by someone who knew someone who said biology was the major you needed to be, well, your overall GPA is going to be much lower because you're not good in those classes. And because biology is not only your major, but all biology classes are factored into your science GPA, it will also lower your science GPA. So it can actually do more damage if you're majoring in a science when that is not your strength. So major in what you excel in. That's part of my job, is to help you get to where you want to go. And so if you are really good at political science and you really enjoy political science, then let's major in political science and we'll work together to get all of those science classes that you need for the MCAT and for medical school. The other thing you don't need to do is you don't have to enroll in medical school as soon as you graduate. This, I think, is the biggest issue that a lot of students at UTC face, is that you have this timeline and this is the timeline we're going to follow. And things happen. Life happens. Things change. And so being willing to sort of revisit your timeline will help you be more successful. Applying to med school when you're not ready is not going to do anyone any good. It's just going to waste you a lot of money and make you really sad because you've applied and you're not ready. The average age of a first-year medical student is actually 26. So if you are going right in after undergrad, you're not going to be in the majority anymore. You're going to be a lot younger. Gap years. Medical schools really like gap years. If you utilize your gap year, or years, depending on how many, correctly, it can make you a far more competitive candidate than going into medical school straight out of undergrad. A lot of folks will travel. They'll do internships. They'll work on preparing for the MCAT and actually take the MCAT after they've graduated. There's a lot of things you can do with a gap year. So be open to applying when you're ready, not because you're graduating. That is the worst possible thing to do because it's really expensive. You're going to spend anywhere from $1,500 to $4,000 applying to medical school, and you really don't want to do that more than once. So apply when you're ready. If you're concerned or you're not sure if you are ready or you want to develop a timeline, set up a meeting with me. That's a lot of what I do, is help folks map out when's a good time to take the MCAT, when's a good time to apply when they're the most competitive. Speaking of MCAT, you want to take all of these courses listed before you begin to study. This is probably the biggest mistake that people make, is they are set on their timeline Okay, I need to take my MCAT junior year. They're in physics and they're maybe in biochemistry, and they're starting to study because they're going to take the MCAT, in mid-April. Semester doesn't end yet. They're in 2 of their MCAT classes. I don't know about you, but I can't study for something I don't know. You really want to take all of these classes. You want to have developed content guides. You want to have developed study guides as you're moving through these classes, and you want to develop a good study plan. The AAMC, which they oversee the MCAT, they did this huge study and basically found that a student that is able to get a competitive score prepares for 3 months, not 30, that is a typo, for 3 months, between 15 and 20 hours a week. So kind of think of where you're at as far as the courses you've completed. Think about when you want to apply to med school, because it's 18 months from the time you apply to the time you start. And then think about how that 3 months, again, 3, will factor in. And there are a lot of free resources. This is probably one of the, best kept secrets, and it shouldn't be, is the AAMC has a ton of free guides and materials for you to study for the MCAT and for you to prep for the MCAT. You don't have to pay thousands of dollars for a test prep class. You are welcome to, if you feel like that will be helpful for you, definitely go for it, but don't pay that money just because, you kind of think, well, the more money I pay, the more prepared I will be. Check out the content guides. This is literally, and it's linked, so I'll be sending you guys the presentation after this. This is also linked on the pre-auth website under the test prep tile. Tons of resources in the Prep Hub, tons of videos. They have actually gone through textbooks and highlighted what chapters you need to review. They have free and discounted practice tests, flashcards. It is a cornucopia of MCAT preparation. And the content guides are really good. And I get this question a lot of, well, when should I start preparing? When should I start? If you're in Bio 1 right now, pull up the content guide for the MCAT and look at the biology section and just start highlighting the things that you've already gone over in class. This can be a good way for you to see, okay, I've learned these things. These are the things that I need to learn more about. And this will kind of give you a good temp check of where you are and how much you need to study. One of the biggest mistakes people make is they think they're ready when they're not. So use these materials and really prepare for the MCAT, again, for 3 months, not 30. So a competitive MCAT score, this is the breakdown. 500 is the 50th percentile. That is the bare minimum. Do not apply to med school below a 500. Please don't do it. I see people do it all the time. I've got 5 years of data, and I got a whole bunch of people that have applied with lower than 500 scores, and maybe like 4 have gotten it. And I can't explain those anomalies, but they're definitely in the minority. You really want to have at least a 500. But really the 501 to 508, that's the 50th to the 75th percentile. That's a comfortable place to be. The 500 it's kind of precarious. Not a bad score, but definitely not sitting comfortably. The 510 to 517, that is a good MCAT score. You're in the 80th to 95th percentile. 518 to 520, we're in the 98th percentile. We're getting to really, really good. And the 521 to 523 is pretty fantastic. So if you've got that 99th percentile, you are really, really doing well. But don't write on that MCAT score. Don't think, oh, well, I have a 521. I'm definitely getting into med school. While the MCAT is an important part of the application, it is not the only part. So when should you retake the MCAT? If you have a 500, you can kind of roll the dice. You really want to look at the sort of average MCAT scores of the schools you're applying to. If they're all, 505 or above, I would maybe think about taking it again. You definitely need to retake it if you've got a 498 or below. that's 100%, that's a retake. And again, it's really not advised to apply to medical schools below a 500. There's just not enough people that get in to make it worth it. And when you reapply to medical school, you give them something to compare. And so if they've seen all of your application materials and they're all really, really good, but you just have that low MCAT score, and then you retake it and you do better, they're going to wonder what else you've done. They're going to compare and say, oh, well, it was just the MCAT score that got better. What were they doing for a year? They could have done an internship. They could have shadowed. They could have done X, Y, Z. So you really want to apply once. You really want to take the MCAT once. But definitely if you've made below a 500, you want to retake it. So here's a rough sort of outline of the application timeline. So like I referenced earlier, whole process takes about 18 months. It's a long and arduous journey. In April and May, you want to be taking the MCAT. And again, like we said, all the prerequisites need to be done before then. May is when the AMCAS opens up, and this is pretty much the same timeline for the AA COMAS. There are some people that apply to DO school, it's not as much, but you can follow this as well for DO. But the AMCAS will open and you guys get a month to fill it out. So there's a whole month that you can go in there and build your application. This is a process. This is not something you sit down and do in 20 or 30 minutes. This is something that will take a couple weeks because you have to input a ton of information. In June, med schools begin accepting AMCAS submissions. So this means that starting in June, you can start hitting the submit button. Late July to early August is when admissions committees start pulling and reviewing applications. Some schools will pull one time. Some schools will pull that one time and get 3,000 to 4,000 applications, and they will get a really solid pool of applicants, so they don't need to pull again. So it's really important that you are ready to go to where, first or second week of June, you're almost ready to hit submit. By middle to late June, you've submitted your application, because that is going to guarantee that a school will have your application in the pool that it pulls. If you run into a situation where you're submitting late August to early September, that becomes a bit of a roll of the dice. Some schools are already moving forward to scheduling interviews at that point, and they're no longer pulling new applications. Some schools do rolling admission, which means they will pull a small batch, go through the process all the way to the interview, submit offers, and then start over again. Not very many schools do this, and a lot of times those schools actually fill up their class in the first cycle. So it's really advised, be prepared, be ready to go, submit that sucker as soon as you're able to. And like I mentioned earlier, August through September is when secondary applications are starting to get sent out. September through January, normally it's on-campus interviews are being scheduled. Currently, they are mostly virtual. We will see how the situation evolves over the next year or two to see if those interviews go back to an on-campus model. And then February through April, admissions offers are made. And so you are able to actually hold multiple offers through April 30th. You have to make a decision by then. And then April through July is when waitlist offers are being made. So a lot of people are holding positions or multiple positions at different schools. And once that decision day hits, then there's a lot of openings that then folks reach out to the wait list. And so a lot of schools admit a lot of folks from the wait list if you are waitlisted. It's not a bad thing. And then August classes begin. So this is a rough outline. So again, when you're thinking about your timeline, you want to think about, okay, when is the August I want to start med school? And then you backtrack at 18 months, and that's when you need to apply. And then you backtrack at least 3 more months, and that's when you need to start preparing for the MCAT. So it's process. So you want to get started as soon as possible. So just a little bit more breakdown of the AMCAS. So like I said, it's the common app for MD programs. Applications open the first week of May, submissions the first week of June. Applications do close for the MCAS in mid-November, but by that point, most schools are well into their interviews. One thing to note about the MCAS, because the MCAS is overseen by the AAMC, as is the MCAT, when you take the MCAT, if you have an AMCAS application, it's automatically linked. There is not additional things you have to do. You don't have to fill out any kind of form. So the process you went through to submit your ACT or SAT scores, you don't have to do that for the MCAS. It's an automatic link. It's also an automatic link for every attempt, so you can't hide if you've taken it multiple times. The only way that the MCAS won't see the scores is if you opt to discard your test, and you actually have to do that before you see the score at the end. So they see everything. Now the AA COMIS, again, follows the same timeline. Again, all the materials have to be submitted. The major difference with the AA COMIS and the MCAS is that you have to send your MCAT scores manually. So you do have to go through the process of requesting your scores and having them sent to the AA COMIS before your application is considered complete. So give yourself a little extra time if you're thinking about DO school to make sure that you get your scores sent, because they won't view your application as complete until those scores are in. So how to find medical schools? Seems like a really daunting task. So when you start to think about it, you want to think about these three things. First of all, you want to think about location. What part of the nation interests you? Where do you want to live? Because you will be here for a while. Do you have friends or family in the area? This seems like a silly question. I know when we're thinking about undergrad, we're like, I want to be as far away from my family. I want to do my own thing. And that's all fine and well. But med school's on a whole nother level. There is not the option to work part-time. There is not, oh, I'm going to class for a couple hours, 3 or 4 times a week. You are in class roughly from like 8 to 5. And when you are not in class, you are studying. Medical schools, if you've gone on a tour or you've gone on a virtual tour, they have tons of study space, and there is study space assigned to someone for the whole year. It is 24/7 swipe card access, and you will often see folks sleeping in there. Folks haven't left in a couple of days. If you're not in class, you're studying, and if you're not in studying, you're in class. There's no outside life. So having friends or family in the area can be really helpful for support, place to get a hot meal. If you have a family, if you're married or you have children, having a family or friend in the area nearby can help with that support. It also gives them someone to see. Most medical schools have a family support group for spouses and families, because you literally don't see your med student for weeks at times, it seems. So you definitely want to think about that. Do you need support? Where in the area can you get it? Can you afford the cost of living? I love San Francisco. I think it's great. I could never afford to live there. It's like $2,000 or $3,000 for like a postage stamp of an apartment. And like I mentioned earlier, you're not working. There's no way you can work and go to medical school. So how are you going to afford the cost of living? And then our incentives to stay closer to your home state. A lot of states have residency discounts. They have preferred admission for residents. So while you may not be keen to go back to Georgia if you're a Georgia resident, they have some pretty sweet deals. And it might be worth spending 3 or 4 years in Georgia and then selecting your residency outside of the state. The requirements. Do you meet the school-specific requirements? And are you in competitive range for the MCAT and the GPA? This is a common mistake a lot of folks make. If you have a 5.05 and a 3.6 GPA and MCAT score, Vanderbilt may not be the place for you. Their overall GPA is much higher and their overall MCAT score is much higher. It's about $40 per school, so you pay $170 to submit your AMCAS and then $40 per each school, so it can get up there. So you really want to pick schools that you're competitive for, otherwise you're just wasting your money. The mission fit. What's the medical school's sphere of influence? What is their mission? Does it align with yours? A lot of medical schools have very specific missions. They want to serve veterans. They want to serve underserved communities. They want to serve rural communities. That's not to say if you want to be a city doctor and you go to a med school that is a focus on rural medicine, you can't do that. But because that is the school's mission to serve rural communities, if someone talks about in their supporting documents how much they want to be a rural healthcare, facilitator, the school's going to gravitate towards that person. There's going to be more opportunities in a place that has a focus on rural medicine to engage in rural medicine. So you want to see if their mission aligns with yours because you want it to be a good fit both ways. Now we're going to talk about schools. I'm going to highlight the Tennessee schools, and then we'll run through Georgia and Alabama, and then we will open up for questions. I know this has been kind of fast and furious, so hopefully you're still with me. So the one everyone thinks about is UT Health Science Center. They're in Memphis, and this is a common mistake that people think they're in Knoxville. They're not in Knoxville. The medical school is in Memphis, but both UT Knoxville and actually Erlanger are residency placements for med students. So a lot of folks run into medical students and assume that they're going to school in Chattanooga, or they're going to school in Knoxville, but they're in their third or fourth year and they're placed in a hospital for hands-on learning through residency or rotation. So that is why people are always thinking that they're in a different city, but the actual school is in Memphis. So if you get into UT Health Science Center, you are gonna go to Memphis. And their class size is about 170, which is on the larger side for medical schools. Their average MCAT for the past couple years has been a 510. Average GPA in the sciences, 366, overall is a 372. They require you have an undergrad degree. And it's really important to note, they only accept AP if you have a higher level course. So if you have AP credit for Bio 1 and 2, you have to take Bio 3 for them to view that as an acceptable prerequisite fulfillment. So be mindful of that. Same thing with chemistry, same thing with physics. So kind of weigh your options. If you have AP physics, do you want to take the next level of physics, or do you want to just retake physics? Up to you. They have 5 selection factors that they look at. They really look at leadership, volunteerism, community engagement. They also look at the interview, your recommendations, your personal statement. So with leadership and volunteerism, I get this question a lot right now. During the pandemic, I can't shadow. There's not a lot of opportunities for me to get hands-on experience. How can I prepare for med school? And the leadership and volunteerism is the perfect way to do it. There are tons of virtual volunteer options on the PreHealth website under experiential learning. If you hit the little virtual volunteer button, it drops down, and I think there's about 20 or 25 different options. Schools are looking for community-minded folks. I was at a national conference this summer virtually and had a chance to talk to several medical schools as well as AAMC reps. And they all were saying the same thing, like we're really looking at the pandemic for a chance for students to really showcase how involved they are in the community, how they're helping, how they're joining in. Now they're not expecting you to jump on the front lines in a hospital, but can you write letters to someone who's going through chemotherapy who now has to go through it alone because no one else is allowed in the hospital? Can you donate your time to translate books? These are all things that you can do to help support your community that shows that you are in the helping mindset. And so UT Health Science Center really looks for that kind of volunteerism. 90% of the incoming class is reserved for Tennessee residents. So if you are a Tennessee resident, this is your school. You should definitely apply because they will give preference to a resident. They value outside the box thinking. They really like gap years. So again, don't feel like you have to apply the second you graduate. Apply when you're ready. Vanderbilt, smaller class size. They're in Nashville, Tennessee. Their MCAT average is a 521. They have a a range that they publish on the website, but it is definitely closer to that 4.0 than that 3.1. I can guarantee you that. Again, they do require you complete an undergrad degree. They'll accept your AP, but they really prefer campus courses. So that's a course taken at a 4-year school. When a medical school says prefer, take that as require, but we're not saying it. You want to hit all the preferred boxes as well as all the required boxes, because I guarantee you a lot of people will be doing that. And because Vanderbilt is private, they don't have a difference in tuition for in-state and out-of-state. So that's really nice for folks that are not from the state of Tennessee. You don't have to pay higher tuition if Vanderbilt is your school of choice. They're really well ranked. Here are some of their stats. They're one of the top research hospitals. They actually have a PhD, MD. So if you're interested in medical research, that is a great degree to get. So you get your academic doctorate along with your medical practicing doctorate. They're also the only school in Tennessee that admit DACA and international students. And they will be virtually visiting UTC on November 4th. We are still working on coordinating the time for that, but keep an eye on the pre-health website for that listing, but you will have a chance to hear from their admissions representative on the 4th of November. Meharry is also in Nashville. 105 is their class size, a little bit lower MCAT score, and again, a range of GPAs. They do require the CASPER, so that is something to note. If you move forward in the process, you will have to do that. And they also require an undergrad degree. They do early admission. You have to apply to only Meharry. You can't select other schools. And if you are admitted, you have to accept, and you'll know by October 1st. If you don't get admitted, you can submit elsewhere after the 1st of October, but just keep in mind it's a bit late in the game. So some options to weigh. You do have to put down a $1,500 deposit as soon as you're admitted. But they are one of the nation's largest private historically Black academic health science center. Historically Black colleges have a really rich history, and Meharry is sort of one of the founders of those. So if you are interested in that, definitely check out the history of Meharry. They are rooted in the United Methodist Church as well. Johnson City hosts the Quillen College of Medicine at ETSU. Smaller class size, 72 students, sort of a mid-range in the MCAT. They're one of the few schools that will admit someone without an undergrad degree. If you have at least 90 hours of college work, you can apply to medical school. However, a bachelor's degree is still strongly requested. So, err on the side of caution. They will be visiting virtually on the 17th of September from 3 to 5. And again, you can sign up for that on the pre-health website. They also do early admission. They list no specific coursework, but you really want to take at least those highlighted courses in the previous slides for the MCAT. They are affiliated with the Veterans Hospital, so if you're interested in working with the veteran community, this is a great school to check out. They also have a focus on primary care. So if that is your sort of area of interest, you may want to consider ETSU. And if you are a military veteran, they also have really good incentives for you as well. So we're going to explore the difference between DO and MD, because we're going to talk about Tennessee's one DO program in a second. And I've listed out the differences for you to kind of compare and contrast. And again, most of the medical practitioners in the United States are MDs, but DOs are growing. And DO, it just looks at medicine a different way. They regard the body as a whole, so they rely on the body to be an active participant in healing. The best way I have heard someone talk about it was a DO will walk by a patient and say, oh, the lady in room 3 with the broken leg. An MD will walk by a room and say there's a broken leg in room 3, because MD is very much problem and solution focused. It's not to say that MDs are not patient focused. It's not to say that MDs don't have good bedside manner, but their practice, their education is focused on problem, answer. What's the issue? Let's fix it. What's the disease? Let's cure it. Versus a DO will look at the whole person. And they do take an additional 200 hours of musculoskeletal education because there is a practice called manipulation. It's kind of like a cross between physical therapy and chiropractor, to help alleviate patients' discomfort for various things. So again, DOs are still doctors, but there is a difference. And LMU, Lincoln Memorial University, is Tennessee's one DO program. They have 2 locations, one in Harrogate, which is the very, very top of Tennessee. You can see Kentucky, and a lot of students will actually live in Kentucky. And then they have a Knoxville campus. The Knoxville campus is new, so each year it will increase its class size until it hits 250, which I believe will be in 2 years. MCAT average, GPA average, a little bit lower, and then they require the AA COMIS. So you can designate a location preference, but just being mindful that if you say, I'm not interested in the Harrogate campus, I'm only interested in the Knoxville campus, if you don't get into the Knoxville campus, you can't, say, oh, wait, no, I'm okay with Harrogate. So they try to honor the selection requests if you have a preference, but, you get in where you get in. And they do offer some graduate programming. If your GPA or your MCAT is not quite there, you can enroll in their year-long graduate program. If you do well the first semester, you can actually get a guaranteed interview without having to complete the program. So that's a very nice program, and if their focus is on rural medicine. Georgia, Emory University is in Atlanta. They have a pretty high MCAT, pretty competitive GPA. They're very research driven. I would akin them close to Vanderbilt in their mission and their focus. The Medical College at Augusta, they have 2 locations. And again, pretty high MCAT. They have an early decision program, but it's only available to Georgia residents. And most of I think it's about 90% of their school, their folks are Georgia residents as well. And you have to be a Georgia resident to apply to early admission. And this holds true for any of the programs in Georgia that we go over, if they have residency requirements, you have to be a resident for at least a year. And if you at any point change your residency, they will rescind your admission at a lot of schools. So Georgia does not play around with their admissions requirements when it comes to residency. Mercer, only open to the Georgia folks. So if you are a Georgia resident, definitely you should apply to this school. They have 3 locations. Morehouse, also in Atlanta, they really value shadowing. They say it several times. Shadowing is something that they really value. So even though you will not find many medical schools, if any, that require shadowing, if a school goes out of its way to say, we value this, do that thing. And then their early decision is also open to Georgia residents. Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. This is the DO program. And linked into the presentation is a short video about a day in the life of a medical student. So it's really, I definitely recommend you give it a watch later. Alabama, UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham, is a fantastic school. They too are very research driven. They're very cutting edge. They have different GPA requirements for in and out of state folks. So be mindful, the minimum for an out of state student is a 3.3, where it's only a 3.0 for in-state. And then early decision, again, is only open to Alabama residents. University of South Alabama, preference is given to are Alabama residents. And again, you have to have a higher GPA and a higher MCAT score to be considered for admission if you are not an Alabama resident. Edward Via College of Osteopathic Medicine is in Auburn. It's actually on/near Auburn University, but it is not part of Auburn University. They have a really interesting view of applicants. They really like the Southern Appalachian region. They're really focused on underserved regions because that is what we are. So definitely check these guys out if you're interested in DO. And then the Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine. It's actually the first osteopathic medicine program in the state of Alabama. No specific residency requirements, but you do have to complete the CASTR. So if you're looking for programs outside the region, here are the two search functions. And again, they're linked into this presentation. They're also linked in to the pre-health website under the guide maps tile. The MSAR is the medical school admissions requirement, very inventive in its name, but you can review all eligible MD programs through the AAMC. It's currently free. Last time I checked it was still free for you to create an account. If it's not free, it was only $30, so not too bad. The free version, even if it goes back to having a cost, you are able to view schools, but there are some functions you can't do as far as view certain things and then favorite things. So a little better functionality with the paid version, but again, as of now, it's no cost. Choose DO is the DO search function. There's not a charge for this service. There never was. It's just on their website. And again, it will allow you to search all of the DO programs. And with that, we are done with the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Stop the recording.